Hey everybody, welcome to the Comics Experience Make Comics podcast. I'm Andy Schmidt. I'll be the host this week instead of Gamal Hennessy, who is recovering from some health issues. We believe he'll be all right. Actually, we're pretty confident he'll be all right, but that's what Gamal's up to right now, which sounds a lot worse than doing what I'm doing, which is hanging out with all of you fine listeners and Mr. Chris Sotomayor, who is a wonderful comic book color artist who I have worked
Oh,
with
thank you.
since 2002 because we're old. Uh, Soto, thank you for joining the podcast. Really appreciate it. How you doing?
Thanks, Andy. I'm doing okay. Thanks for having me.
And I expect that we're only going to hear kind of half thought out answers from Soto because he never isn't
Probably.
coloring. So half of his brain will be coloring while you're watching this, and the other half will be maybe paying attention to me in the conversation. But we're here this week to talk about coloring because we are bringing at Comic Experience, we're bringing our live courses back, which, most of our courses now, or a lot of our courses now, are on demand. So you make a purchase and then you can view them at your own pace. You always have access to them. But there are some things that Soto and myself and some of the other instructors really love about the live courses, and it's mainly that we get to know you, right? So we get to interact with you as a class. We get to know your work. You get to turn in your work. We get to make fun of it. I mean, comment and give really good feedback on it. And we do so in a polite and professional but honest way. And I think, we all think that that really enriches the learning experience, which is not to demean the on-demand versions. We think they're great too, but this is like a really like full experience, and you get to go week to week with us. Soto's Introduction to Comic Book Writing course is going to start the first week of February on Monday nights.
Coloring.
What did I say? Storytelling?
You said writing. You're in
Writing.
writing mode.
Ugh,
That's
I'm in
okay.
writing mode. Yeah.
I get it.
Sorry. Introduction to Comic Book Coloring course starts the first week of February. The reason we're talking about it this week is because this week only there is a special on the website where if you reserve your seat, you will get the entire on-demand course of comic book editing and project management, which is a course that I taught. And we'll talk a little bit about why pairing those two things makes sense because I don't know that it's intuitively obvious, um, but it does make sense. We'll get to that in a minute. First, I'd like to ask you, Soto, like
Yep.
what's sort of the overall thing of the course? Like what's the point?
Well, for me, the point of the course is to get people in who don't really understand what they're doing yet or have an interest in the art of coloring and really fine tuning their process, getting them to understand where you start, where that middle is, and how to finish it off. Um, but I like to do it in a way that's really grounded in art. It's not a Photoshop class; it's an art class. That's what I like to tell people. It's a class that uses all these classical art techniques and theories and applies them to the art of coloring. It's not a computer class. I mean, that's why we have the class set up the way that we do, in that you don't have to use Photoshop. You can use any software you want. I mean, it's up to you to kind of translate all the little technical things. But after the first night of technical stuff, we don't really do a lot of technical. It's all like application and theory, like color theory, rendering, values. We do a lot of art-based homework, not computer coloring homework per se. We do art stuff, like the same kind of stuff you would do in a like a college course or a continuing ed course, but it's crafted in a way that it hones in on the specific talents and the specific skill set that you need to do this job.
Yeah, well, I like the way that you put that because it's not a Photoshop class, right? There is a technical aspect to it, but if you're thinking, oh, I'll learn how to use Photoshop and maybe we'll do all this cool stuff, that's not really the point of the intro class.
Right.
There are points where you will learn more things, especially as you go move on into the advanced course and that sort of stuff. If you do move on, but but you approach everything very much as a painter. I know you're a big fan of Maxfield Parrish, so I
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
that his paintings come up in your class. And
Yeah.
what I like about it is that it's fun to talk about this stuff. But you and I, me from the editor perspective, I can't tell you how many coloring portfolios I've seen from people who don't have that art background, that only know the technical side of stuff, and they just don't know what they're doing. And it's very common to hear that, oh, well, art is subjective. It's just in the eye of the beholder. And while that is true, there are certain things that we can look at and evaluate pretty objectively. And that's, I think taking that in heart in your course and applying it professionally, like I am applying for professional level work and gearing it towards that has been really great. What are some of the things that you kind of see? Like, can you tell when you look at somebody's portfolio, oh, you learned Photoshop and then decided you were going to color, or or can you tell like, oh, you've learned like paint theory, but you're still learning Photoshop? Like, what are those sorts of things that you see in portfolios that kind of tip you off in advance?
I absolutely can tell. I can tell within the first 3 pages whether I'm looking at an artist that is learning the tool or someone who knows the tool but doesn't understand the art. You'll see some very directionless color choices. I hate to harp on this, but you'll see a lot of purple in people who don't understand how to use color because it's an easy color to use where you don't really have to put a lot of thought into it because it can be warm or cool depending on the context. It can be the color that supports the action or it can be the color that sets everything back. It's kind of a do-all thing. It's like duct tape. You can use it. It's not always the best solution, but you can use it and you can get by, right? I would rather have someone come in who's an artist and is learning the program as a tool, whether it's Photoshop, Clip, Procreate, whatever. It's easier to get them to understand how the tools are used, rather than trying to get someone who understands the tools and thinks all the magic is in the tools, because that's the mindset that someone who just knows the computer really well has, right? They think, oh, I'll make this layer to do this, and I'll use this blending mode to do that. That that that's giving the software the option of doing the thing for you instead of you controlling the result, right?
Yeah, I was just reminded, I haven't thought about this in quite a while, but there was a time when I was editing at Marvel and you were coloring, and Marvel was approached by a studio that said, "Hey, we can color these pages like super cheap." Um, and so Marvel made a deal with them to color X number of comics per month, and it was a pretty large number,
Yeah.
to reduce costs. And what it turned out was they had a bunch of people that knew how to use Photoshop but knew nothing about coloring comics. And as an editor, um, any money that they saved on the cost of those pages was lost in time in terms of editorial time spent, because we would have to go revision after revision after. It was so mind numbing, and that was because they weren't artists. Um, and so that
I
was
remember
just,
that.
yeah, that was very telling, and it didn't last very
Yeah.
long. I mean, to
Yeah.
Marvel's credit, they realized like this is not workable. Um,
Yeah.
so that was good. That was that was a rough 6 months. Um, but the other thing I was going to say is that one of the things that I see artists who either who approach each panel on a page like it is its own individual image in a vacuum, right? As if it is a
Right.
full painting, it's the whole thing. But then when you look at the page as a whole, it doesn't. always work. So that's one of the things I think is really interesting about your course is you'll get into, not only do you have to make the physicality within the panel itself work and separate planes and do all those kind of cool things, but you also have to make the page as a whole work. And so you really talk about stuff that gets very much, I mean, you start with painting and color theory and hues and all that stuff, but then you really get into in the intro course, you get into like the nuts and bolts of, okay, now this is coloring comics. It's interesting to me because that mirrors a lot of like what Paul and I do like in our intro to writing class. Like at first we're talking about story and it applies to a story, whether it's a comic or a novel or a film script or whatever. But by the end of that course, you are 100% writing a comic, and your coloring course is structured in a similar way. You start with the wider art, which is great because I think that's the starting point. Like
Yeah.
I, I've seen a lot of coloring courses. I've seen a lot of comic art courses that don't start at the beginning. They start with this assumption that these certain things, and we really try our best not to do that. We start and we get you there in a very logical, progressive sort of manner. That's one of the things I like a lot about what you do in your course.
Thanks,
Um,
thanks. I try, well, like you said, broad scope first, then start narrowing everything down. I think that works. I think that progression just it develops the understanding, right? It helps you understand these broad concepts, and then the way I just kind of zero in on everything, which I think is the way a lot of successful teachers do. They start
right.
going into the details, and then everything just starts coming together a little bit better.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure it works. I know it works because not only do we have people in your coloring course that are working professionally for publishers all over the place, but
Yeah,
I've personally hired a ton of folks that have come up through your coloring courses. And I know that when I do that, I mean, of course I'm going to look at everybody's portfolio. But like I know that when I get somebody's portfolio that's good and they've come through your courses, and I know other editors and other places and just me like patting us on the back, right? That they know that base is there, that there is that foundation is there, and that from an editor's perspective, there is a lot of confidence that goes with hiring. If I'm hiring somebody for the first time and their pages look nice, you don't know how long did they work on those pages, how many revisions did they have to do on those pages,
right.
and this is true for pencilers and inkers, it's true for writers too, right? Like you don't know that yet. And so you go, okay, these pages turned out well. Hopefully, this is not going to be a tough process to get new pages to that level. I should be able to get them. My hope is that I'll hire this person and we'll be at that level or be very close to that level, on the first draft that comes in, right?
Right.
So, it's what's nice is that when they come from courses like yours is that you have that confidence as an editor of go, okay, the pages look nice, but I know that they've worked with Soto, so I know that I can talk to them, that we will share common language, right, about how comics work and about how the art works and how the coloring works. And that's one of the reasons why pairing your course with the editorial and project management courses is important. Because I would love to hear what you think of editorial interactions. Because my guess, my guess is that every editor that you've ever worked with has been charming and delightful and understanding and a clear communicator. They do no wrong, is my understanding,
Yeah. Yeah.
is what most freelancers say. So so let's talk a little bit about working professionally because ultimately I think getting that editing course in there with this, which you can do the editing part like at your leisure, right? It's not
Right.
you don't have to show up every week. You can do it or just watch the pieces you want to watch in whatever order. But like working with an editor, or it does not even have to be an editor or a publisher, but working with someone where you're trying to have a meeting of the minds on a creative process like this can be difficult. Have you, when you work, I don't like as much fun as it is to tell horror stories, which we both have.
Yeah.
let's focus on the positives. When
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
find an editor or a client, however you want to sort of think about it, that you work well with, how valuable is that in your experience? Like,
It's
what do
gold.
you do to to make sure that you have more of that and less of butting heads or miscommunication or any number of things that can go wrong that aren't personality flaws. They're just not, things that may not be working great.
Right. I mean, this this speaks to my love of comics as a medium anyway, because my favorite thing about comics is the collaborative nature, right? But with that collaborative nature, yeah, there can be some pitfalls. Um, you're dealing with other people's sensibilities that you have to keep in mind, specifically and most importantly, that of the editor that you're working with. So I have to learn my editor's vocabulary. I have to learn my editor's sensibilities just as much as I would have to learn the writer's sensibilities, the inker's sensibilities, the penciler's sensibilities, and the letterer's sensibilities, right? Because I'm interacting with all of them, whether it's just by sending JPEGs or firing off emails, trying to figure out like what color a sound effect would be, or just discerning line art and trying to focus, different different lighting conditions. So my take working with an editor, once you have that relationship at a point where you understand and you can communicate in even a shorthand, that's gold, right? Because that makes the process a lot easier and smoother. And that just comes from a place of empathy, right? Like I said, I like the collaborative nature of comics, but it's not just, working on the artwork. It's it's knowing that I have to do my job in a certain way that makes everyone's life as easy as possible, right? Because that's how I make myself gold to my collaborators. Understanding the editorial process helps you understand what that involves. It's not just about uh, communicating with your editor and their likes for, texture on pages or a limited palette or, action-packed color schemes. It's also about delivering files in a certain way that makes everyone's life easier. It's about having that communication, knowing that, just knowing like if you take lunch at 1 o'clock, I know if I send emails out to you, if I send JPEGs out to you, I'm not going to send them at 1. I'll try to hit you before that, or I'll try to hit you after that. I don't need this black hole where, it just leaves us both kind of in a guessing game. It's about delivering files, it's about delivering final files, before books need to go out, you know,
Right.
just so
Yeah,
that
and
I don't
and
jam up the line.
yeah, and a lot of the editing process talks about, how to manage deadlines. I mean, it talks about it from the editor's perspective. We also have another course that we just launched like a week ago called Professional Best Practices that is more from the freelance perspective and how to deal with editors, how to protect yourself from certain situations and how to troubleshoot. But
Sure.
understanding from the editor's perspective, like what are you trying to do? Why naming conventions are important. Like a lot of that sort of simple stuff that a lot of people don't think about, right?
Right.
And then understanding that, I've heard it said a lot of times that being a freelance artist is about problem solving. Like what
Yeah.
you want to be is the person that, makes the editor or the project manager's life easier. Like you don't want to be the squeaky wheel. That doesn't mean you can't ask questions or anything like that, but generally speaking, you want to be a problem solver. And I think that's a lot of what that editing class gives you, really concrete examples and tools to be able to do that and to understand the mindset of someone that you're working with, or in some cases working for. Um, and it's so I think those two go hand in hand. So you're getting a really
Yeah.
great basis on the art skills and the technical skills, but then with pairing it with the editing class, you get this really great understanding of professionally how you want to act. And the two of those things together can be a really powerful way to help you sidestep a lot of very common pitfalls.
Yeah.
Lot of people put their feet in their mouth, sometimes both feet at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's not just freelancers to editors, it's editors and freelancers too. Like, I mean, it's very common. And the thing that's nice about, courses from Soto and myself is that both of us have been doing this professionally for a long time. So you can learn from the number of times that we have stuck our feet in our mouth. And we
Yeah,
can tell you, don't, that shoe doesn't taste very good. So you don't want to do that. Um,
yeah,
and we try to help kind of grease those rails so that if you are wanting to do this professionally, or even if you're wanting to do it, part time, or on the side, these things are all helpful to help you grow that experience, grow that business more quickly and more effectively.
absolutely. Because it's a business. This is
Yeah,
not just a
even
bunch
though
of
you don't
people
want it
getting
to be,
together.
right?
Yeah,
Even though you don't want it to be a business, it is clearly a business.
yeah, yeah. And that goes in hand with the project management aspect, that you're bundling my class with. Because if you don't know how to manage your time and you don't know how to manage your workflow as a freelancer, you can't sustain a career based on chaos, which is what you would have.
We've
You
seen
know,
people try.
they've tried and they've lasted months. They don't
Some have
have
lasted
careers that
longer than
span
that.
decades. Wow.
Uh, yeah, and the other thing I think that the editing class helps with is we talk a fair amount in that course about um, personalities and how much of this business, this artistic endeavor is personality based, and it's learning how to not just click with people, but how to disagree with somebody in a way that doesn't, blow up a project, or blow up a couple of days where you're both firing off, emails that are going to turn up on social media just weeks later.
Yeah.
Um, that kind of a thing. How to maintain a professional demeanor and handle things with some degree of grace, um,
Yeah.
which is which is a skill. It is a skill that you can learn. I do run into a lot of people that think that's something. Oh yeah, they're just a hothead. Well, they can learn not to be a hothead. Like that's a real thing. Let's
Yep.
not just give people a pass for that kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, so we are convinced that taking Soto's live coloring class is in and of itself well worth the money for it. But in this case, you get a full additional on-demand course in editing for free this week only, if you're listening to this when this drops. So be sure to go to Comics Experience, click on the courses. It should pop right up. It is called the Introduction to Comic Book Coloring and Editing Bundle. That is the specific course you want to find, and that one comes with our project management course, which is about $250 typically, but is free with the purchase of Soto's live course. So that's very cool.
Yeah.
Soto, any last words before we take off?
I mean, I think you summed it up nicely. I love teaching my live course. I like getting to know people, not just not just getting to know them as talents, but getting to kind of guide them along and help them understand like how their talents can be applied. That's probably my favorite thing about the course. Yeah.
Awesome. Very well said. Soto, thanks for joining me for the podcast. And all you listeners out there, thanks for listening. Please check out the course, see if it's right for you, and keep making your comics.
Thanks for having me, Andy.